So I thought before we get started here, I would kind of give you a breakdown exactly how I got to Copán Ruinas from El Salvador. Typically, a lot of people will come here from Guatemala, maybe from Flores or somewhere like that, which isn't all that far away from here in the grand scheme of things. Lots of tourist shuttles and those sorts of things go back and forth between here and some of the places in Guatemala. And then they also go from here up to the coast up where Roatan Island are and some of the other places sort of off the coast. But for me, I was already in Suchitoto in El Salvador, which was going to be my last stop anyway. So I figured out how to get here, basically. And it took a bit of research online, took some, took some time, no doubt, with Google and talking to people and kind of piecing it together from different information sites. But I thought what I would do here is just kind of give you a lowdown. So if you are in Suchitoto in El Salvador, you don't have to double back to a different place or go back to Guatemala to get here or anything like that. Basically what I did first was I got on a bus from Suchitoto and went to the city of Aguilares, which was on El Salvador bus number 163. And that bus ran every 20 or 30 minutes, basically from the town square in Suchitoto where all the other buses leave from. And that cost me 75 cents. Took about an hour. I got to Aguilares, and then from there I caught the bus number 119. And so all I did was I rode the 163 to the end. It basically lets you off near the bus terminal, walk back out to the main road, walk across the street so that you're heading in the right direction, obviously, and just watch for a bus 119. And I hopped on that. It was $1.65 US, and that bus took about, I would say, 2.5 hours, start to finish. It's just an old school bus, chicken bus, if you will. But it was a fine ride. There was no issues with it at all. The ride was very smooth to the border. So then you get to the border town of what's known as El Poy. And El Poy is the last sort of stop in El Salvador if you're crossing over to Honduras. Great setup there. You basically walk to the El Salvador immigration first to get your stamp out. They give you a little receipt with a barcode on it. And then when you leave the immigration office and walk towards the border, you hand that slip to the security guard that's working there. And that's it. You're done on the El Salvador side. Walk across the bridge, and there's a very small immigration building on the left-hand side for Honduras. And you walk in there and you present your passport, of course. They take your fingerprints, take a picture, all the usual stuff you'll see when walking across borders. And I believe there was also a $2 or $3 US entry fee. I am from Canada, obviously, as most of you know by now. And so the way that the visas work in this part of the world are different from country to country. Generally speaking, a lot of people have one of two options. So I'll speak to my part specifically, being Canadian. So when you come into this part of the world, there's what's known as a CA4 visa, travel visa, and that gives you 90 days. And those 90 days are combined across Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua. So you get 90 days in total for those four countries. And I had already used up almost my entire first 90 days when I was just in Guatemala because I had spent so much time there. And then so the second 90 days I got, when I got to the Honduran border, they looked at my passport stamps and subtracted the math. So I was in El Salvador for 24 days, I think it was. So they handed me back my passport with the new stamp in it and said you have 66 days left on your CA4 visa. And so for me, that's 66 days for Honduras and Nicaragua, since I'm continuing to head south. So after you cross the border and you get your stamps on the Honduran side and you're all done there, the next thing then, of course, is you have to continue on. And there's really not a lot of information on how to do that. So basically what I did is I just went up and asked somebody. I said, how do I get to the first town here past the border? And the first town past the border is Ocotepeque in Honduras. And basically all I did was I just walked up to the first colectivo that I saw and asked them if they were going there, which they were, of course, because that's really the only place to go from El Poy. And that was 15 lempira. So that was sort of my first time I've having to use the new Honduran currency. I was able to exchange cash at the border. After I completed the El Salvador side, there were actually people there waiting, looking to exchange money. I got a very good rate there, which was pretty close to the exchange rate that's official, the official bank rate or whatever you want to call it. So that was great. And so I got some cash transferred there, and that was all great. So I took the colectivo from El Poy to Ocotepeque. I arrived there and it was absolutely pouring. It was raining so hard. It was only a short drive. It was only like 20 minutes or so, but by the time I got there, it had started to pour. So they take you to the main terminal there in the town. And then from there, again, it's just a matter of asking around and finding someone who's taking you to the next location. And so when I was there, I was very lucky in that when I pulled up and got off the first colectivo and asked what was next, the first guy I talked to said, oh yeah, there's a colectivo right over here that's heading to Santa Rosa de Copán. And so I talked to them and hopped on board, and it was about, 20 minutes or so before it finally left. There was only 3 or 4 of us on board, so it didn't wait until it was full. But I think it waited until it was scheduled departure time of, I think it was, I want to say like 2 o'clock by this point. So that colectivo from Ocotepeque to Santa Rosa de Copán was 150 lempira. So it was a bit more expensive, but it was also a 3.5 hour ride. In this part of the world, there's not a lot of tourist shuttles or big bus companies that are in this part of the country. There are Christopher Columbus, as they're called, or Cristobal Colon bus, or Christopher Columbus, as I'm going to call it. I think that's funnier. They run through the major cities, but out this part of Honduras and El Salvador, you're really reliant on local, colectivos, chicken buses, those types of things, which is fine. They're a great way to travel. They're cheap, and I have found that for the most part they've been very reliable and safe. I would say that the craziest experiences I had on chicken buses was back in Guatemala, but El Salvador and so far here in Honduras, they seem to be a bit more careful, we'll say. So once I arrived in Santa Rosa de Copán, I had a couple choices. My ultimate choice was to stay there for a couple nights just to relax. It had been a long trip. It took about almost 8 hours, I would say, to get from Suchitoto in El Salvador to Santa Rosa de Copán in Honduras. Between the two legs in El Salvador, the border crossing, and then 2 more legs on the Honduras side, it made for a long day. So you could certainly have pushed through when you're in Santa Rosa de Copán. There's another about 3.5 hours to here in Copán Ruinas. But I would say that, if you have the opportunity to stay over for a night or 2 in Santa Rosa, it's a good opportunity to kind of break it up a little bit and makes the trip to this final destination much easier. So at this point, I'm going to insert a little review here that I did of the place I stayed at in Santa Rosa de Copán. I found it on Airbnb, and it was a fantastic experience. It was even better than I expected it to be honest. When I arrived, I was like, this is all mine, this whole space. And yeah, it was great. So I kind of want to throw that in here real quick just to kind of give you a review of that place first.
Hey there, WanderBeard here, aka Ian. I'm just doing a quick room review of a place I stayed at. I apologize if I have a bit of a cold and a raspy throat today, but we'll survive. My first official stop in Honduras is Copán Ruinas, where I'm heading today. However, I have actually been in Honduras for the last 2 nights, staying in the town of Santa Rosa de Copán. However, I did want to stop and just do a quick review of the place I stayed at here in Santa Rosa because it was fabulous. I found this place on Airbnb, and I'll put all the information here on the screen at the end. And for 2 nights here, this place was, it was super cozy. So this was basically an apartment that's available. The lady who runs the place actually lives just next door, which is great. So she was very helpful. But this is a full apartment unit that's for rent here. And you can see there's a full kitchen included, fridge, stove, coffee maker. All the utensils and cookware and stuff is up in the cupboards. There's a microwave here too if you need that. There's actually a washing machine here, which I didn't use, but is hooked up. I believe you can use it if you need to. Nice little bathroom with a great shower. One of these days I'm going to do a video on these shower heads because I think people are curious about them. But nice shower, lots of shampoos and soaps were provided. This door is locked. It's just a storage room. And this was the bedroom. I apologize for the messy bed. I was just packing. But lots of storage space here. Nice, double-sized bed with a great fan. I will say so far here in Honduras, surprisingly, I haven't felt the need for air conditioning. It hasn't been quite as hot as it was in El Salvador. I think probably because of the elevation. We're about 1,300 meters here above sea level, so that certainly helps with some of the heat, and it rains here a bit more frequently than it has in El Salvador. But there's also like a little table here, again, just for throwing stuff on, and a TV. So yeah, it's a great spot here. It was a really pleasant surprise. I have had 0 issues while here. It's up on the hill a little bit from the main downtown area in Santa Rosa. So just keep that in mind, that if you are in the town and you do choose to stay here, it's a bit of a hike back up the hill, but just take your time. That's what I did. But overall, great spot. I'll put the information here on the screen, but where I got this on, as I said, on Airbnb, the price and all that stuff. And can't recommend it enough. It was a great stop for a couple days, and onward we go now to Copán Ruinas.
So for Santa Rosa, I didn't really film anything while I was there other than doing the room review. I was just kind of there to kind of break up my trip a little bit. Nice little town though. So if you're in the town, it's nice to kind of wander around the downtown area. There's a nice park down there and some restaurants and things like that. I didn't bother, like I said, filming. I just was looking for a bit of a break. So after that couple of nights in Santa Rosa de Copán, I headed out to get to here to Copán Ruinas to finish my trip. And from there, all I did was I just hopped in a taxi, went down to the main bus terminal in Santa Rosa, and looked for the first colectivo that was going to Copán Ruinas. Now, as I mentioned, Copan is fairly popular, and so you do see a lot of tourists here. So there are a fair number of colectivos that do travel back and forth between those two towns. I would say, it was about 3.5 hours from Santa Rosa to here. So that collectivo that I got from there to here was 115 lempira in total. And it was a straight shot. It was, easy. They checked my bag in the trunk, so I had left the room. It was pretty empty when we first left Santa Rosa, but it was pretty full up by the time we got here. And so in total, it took about, I would say, 11 to 12 hours of total travel from Suchitoto to here. If you're looking at just travel time. And in total, it cost me about $12 US. And that includes the $3 I had to pay at the border to get into Honduras. So $9 for transportation and $3 entry fee. So that is a great way to get from El Salvador over to here in Honduras. If you're looking to travel this way and do it on a budget and make it really affordable. So overall, a great experience, but I thought it was good to kind of break it down here a little bit because it's not a route that, as I said, is commonly traveled. I certainly do see some. There was another tourist group, family, I think it was, on the collectivo from Santa Rosa to here. So I think there is some travel this way, but it's not super popular. So it was definitely a fun project to try and figure it out, but not that difficult in the end of it all. Just to do some research, use your brain a little bit, ask some questions, and don't be afraid to ask questions to people nearby. Everyone's always been very helpful when you're looking to get somewhere, and it's been great for that experience.